Thank you very much, and good morning. I'd just like to add, Professor Zuhur, that I speak for myself. I don't speak and give the view of any organization, but I would like to acknowledge and thank the Palestine Center, where I'm a fellow, for their support that allows me to do my research. I just returned 2 days ago from a visit to Jordan and Lebanon. I wasn't able to go to Gaza, but since I was in the area, I wrote to a friend of mine in Gaza just to see how he was doing and to tell him that I wished I could be there. And he replied with a few lines that I wanted to share to you. He's an academic and a peace activist, born and raised in Gaza. He says, "Dear Ali, it's so nice to hear from you and know that you are just around the corner. I really wish you could visit us here in Gaza. I know that it is wishful thinking, but one day we will see each other in person. I don't need to tell you how bad it is here. Things have deteriorated so rapidly. In addition to all the shortages you know about, now we have no fuel. The last time I drove my car was 2 months ago. I really don't know what more is needed for the international community to intervene. How many more dead bodies, I wonder. Anyway, my friend, they will not break our spirit." I wanted to share that with you because I think it's so easy to forget that we are talking about entire human communities, cities, people, and how hard it is to talk about any solutions when the freedom to travel, to dialogue, to exchange ideas is so restricted. And the importance then of events like this in allowing us to begin to break these taboos. Since Hamas won the legislative election in the occupied Palestinian territories in January 2006, the United States has attempted to isolate the movement in Gaza while propping up the leadership of Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas and his electorally defeated Fatah faction in Ramallah, in the hope of reversing the election result and restoring Fatah to power. This has fit in with an overall U.S. strategy of fostering so-called moderate regimes in the region. These are regimes which are not defined by any democratic or human rights criteria, but simply by the criterion that they are allied with the United States and dependent on it to a greater or lesser extent. And the U.S. is at the same time determined to confront indigenous forces such as Hamas in Palestine and Hezbollah in Lebanon, which the United States portrays not as indigenous movements with deep social roots, but merely as puppets of regional rival Iran. This strategy has backfired spectacularly. In Palestine, Hamas has withstood an extraordinary military, economic, and political campaign waged against it by Israel with the encouragement of the United States. After Hamas's breach of the border wall with Egypt last January, allowing hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to obtain basic supplies, Hamas is arguably more popular than ever. Meanwhile, the U.S.-sponsored peace negotiations between Israel and Abbas's U.S.-recognized Palestinian Authority have gone nowhere. And there is a growing realization that the policy has failed and it must change. But how it must change, the discussion is really only at the beginning. I won't go over all the background, but just briefly, some context. Within weeks of the January 2006 election, Israel and the Quartet, which is the ad hoc group representing the U.S., the European Union, Russia, and the UN, had agreed to the complete isolation of Hamas unless it met certain conditions, renouncing armed struggle, recognizing Israel's main political demand that it has a right to exist as a Jewish state, and agreeing to abide by all signed agreements. No reciprocal conditions were imposed on Israel, which did not have to recognize Palestinian political demands a priori, was free to continue military attacks on Palestinians in the occupied territories, and could violate signed agreements with total impunity. it appears that these conditions were specifically tailored to be unacceptable to Hamas. The United States, in collaboration with Israel and elements of the Fatah leadership in Ramallah, put in place a siege to squeeze Hamas and the civilian population in Gaza in the hope that the population would turn against Hamas and back to Fatah. The United States also sponsored what amounted to an attempted coup against Hamas by Contra-style militias, which provoked Hamas's complete takeover of the interior of the Gaza Strip in June 2007. And by now I'm sure many of you have read the article, The Gaza Bombshell, in April's Vanity Fair, which details the background to this coup attempt. Thank you. This setback has prompted the U.S. to support even greater pressure on Hamas while trying to prop up Abbas and his authority with more military and economic aid. In short, I think this will fail. I would argue that the only solution is indirect and direct engagement with Hamas. One of the common claims of Israeli and other opponents of such engagements is that Hamas is an irrational jihadist organization with no identifiable or satiable political goals other than the destruction of Israel, as almost every newspaper article repeats whenever the name of Hamas is mentioned. However, Hamas is, as Dr. Zuhur pointed out, a complex, dynamic, and diverse movement whose leadership has set its sights on a nationalist political strategy that cannot succeed without engagement with the group's adversaries, including Israel. And the group's pragmatism in this sense has been demonstrated by the numerous hudnas or ceasefires that it has repeatedly abided to and negotiated with Israel through intermediaries, including the current one that is more or less holding now. And of course, its election platform did not mention anything about the destruction of Israel. In my remaining few minutes, I want to talk about a model that some Hamas leaders have put forward that I think should be seized on. This was put forward in an op-ed in the New York Times on November 1st, 2006, by a senior Hamas advisor, Ahmed Youssef, in the Gaza Strip. And he says the following. I'm going to read 3 brief paragraphs and then close my comments. He says, "Here in Gaza, few dream of peace. For now, most dare only to dream of a lack of war. It is for this reason that Hamas proposes a long-term truce during which the Israeli and Palestinian peoples can try to negotiate a lasting peace. A truce is referred to in Arabic as a hudna. Typically covering 10 years, a hudna is recognized in Islamic jurisprudence as a legitimate and binding contract. A hudna extends beyond the Western concept of a ceasefire and obliges the parties to use the period to seek a permanent, non-violent resolution to their differences." I'm skipping a bit. He says, "Whereas war dehumanizes the enemy and makes it easier to kill, a hudna affords the opportunity to humanize one's opponents and understand their position with the goal of resolving the intertribal or international dispute." He says, "This concept is not as foreign as it might seem. After all, the Irish Republican Army agreed to halt its military struggle to free Northern Ireland from British rule without recognizing British sovereignty. Irish Republicans continue to aspire to a united Ireland free of British rule, but rely upon peaceful methods. Had the IRA been forced to renounce its vision of reuniting Ireland before negotiations could occur, peace would never have prevailed. Why should more be demanded of the Palestinians?" This is one example of some very conciliatory and I think far-reaching ideas put forward by